Hi friends, welcome back, and in this video let us cover the average directional index or the ADX indicator. As you can see on my screen, ADX is one indicator which will help you identify momentum in the price action, which means whenever you have some strong momentum in the price action, the ADX will give you an insight to that. Do note, ADX will not tell you whether it's an uptrend or a downtrend. It will just help you identify that yes, the markets are trending, or no, the markets are not trending but it's consolidating. ADX is plotted as a line which ranges between 0 to 100, and whenever your line is rising or there is a steepness in the increase in the ADX value, it means that the market is trending. Whether it's upward or downward, we would not know, but we have another component of the ADX index which will help us know the movement of the trend as well. We'll come to that in the subsequent part of this video itself. So for now, just remember that ADX is a line which will help you identify the momentum in the stock price and to identify those phases where the momentum is not existing and the stock price is consolidating. It will also help you filter out these consolidation phases or the non-trending phases. ADX as an indicator can be applied on multiple time frames, but as technical analysis works, it works better on higher time frames as compared to smaller time frames. So always remember that when you start practicing these indicators that we have covered, start off with higher time frame analysis followed by lower time frame analysis. Now let's look at a few examples to understand what the ADX indicator is and how it really works. On my screen, if you notice, I have the chart of Monte Carlo fashions on a weekly time frame. If you see this particular phase which I have highlighted with this dotted line, the price action is clearly forming a lower top, lower bottom, lower top, lower bottom formation, and the prices are going down. And if you notice the ADX line, it is going upwards, which means that there is a trend in the price action and the trend has some momentum or strength. Now if you notice this particular section which I have highlighted, the stock price is broadly consolidating and the ADX line is almost flat or it is not highly trending. This means that this is a phase where there is non-existence of trend in the market, and this is the place where you should try to identify a support and resistance zone and wait for the stock price to touch any of these two zones to define a meaningful entry. And again, if you notice, after the stock came out of the consolidation, the ADX started rising and the stock price also started rising. Do note that the ADX line was rising in both the cases, when the stock price was falling as well as when the stock price was rising. This is what I meant when I said that the ADX indicator is not going to define the trend of the movement. It will just tell you whether a trend exists or not. Now let's look at one more example. On my screen, I have the chart of GM Breweries on a weekly time frame. If you notice this highlighted section, the stock was in a consolidation phase for more than 2 years. And if you notice the ADX line, this is broadly flat, indicating that there is no trend in the price movement. Around the month of October-November 2020, the ADX line started going up, although the stock price was still consolidating. This was the first indication that a momentum is being built up in the stock price. And then once the stock came out of the consolidation with huge volumes and huge green body candles, you can see how the ADX line also peaked. So before you got an entry, you got a clue that the ADX line is peaking, meaning that there is some momentum that is being built in the stock price. Now it can mean that the stock price can start going up or the stock price can start going down. That is where you start looking at how to analyze the candles or how to look at other indicators like moving averages or RSI to get that view or to get that insight. Again, if you notice this particular highlighted section, the ADX line has cooled down after a good correction in the stock price and the ADX line is again flat, which means that if you follow this stock diligently, you might get a fantastic trade if it is on the long side, because this stock is not in the FNO universe. So if you are able to gauge that the ADX line is picking up and a scenario similar to this one unfolds, it can be a very good risk reward ratio and a very good long trade. Do note that this is just an educational video and we are not recommending a buy or sell on any stock. Looking at one more example which is on my screen, I have the chart of Mahindra and Mahindra on a weekly time frame. When the stock price was correcting, we saw that the ADX line was rising. Then after a brief period of consolidation and correction, the ADX line again started rising when the stock price started rising. And then after the ADX line was cooled off, again the ADX line started rising with the stock prices rising. So this is how you can look at the ADX line to identify whether a momentum exists in the stock price movement or not. Now, having said that, we can look at the trending and non-trending phases in price action. It is also imperative to know whether the trend is in the upside or downside. This is where we have another addition to the ADX indicator known as the DMI or the Directional Movement Index. So while the ADX line will provide you a view whether the stock price has momentum or not, the DMI lines will tell you whether the momentum is on the upside or downside. So always remember, whenever your DMI positive line is higher than the DMI negative line, it means that there is a bullish phase, and whenever your DMI positive is less than the DMI negative line, that is a bearish phase. Don't get confused. We'll look at an example and try to clarify this better. As you can see on my screen, I have the chart of Mahindra and Mahindra on weekly time frame, and here I have taken the DMI indicator, which is an additional indicator having two more plots as compared to the ADX indicator. The black line here represents the ADX line, the green line represents the DMI positive line, and the red line represents the DMI negative line. Let's look at this section which I have highlighted having a blue vertical dotted line, these two areas. If you notice these two areas, this is where the DMI positive was higher than the DMI negative after a crossover, and the ADX line had started to peak higher. This means that this is a bull phase and a bull momentum in the stock price. And if you see this particular zone, a similar situation was visible. The DMI positive is higher than the DMI negative, and the ADX line has also started going higher, which means this is a positive or a bullish uptrend in the stock price. Now bringing our focus to these two zones, which is highlighted by two dotted red lines, here the DMI negative went higher than the DMI positive after a crossover, and the ADX line started flattening and going down. This was a clear indication of a bear run. That means the stock price has entered into a correction mode and the stock price is in a downtrend. And similarly, if you notice this particular section, the DMI negative line went higher than the DMI positive line after giving a crossover, and the ADX line started trending, which means this is a strong downtrend or a strong bear grip. So this is how you can use the ADX indicator along with the DMI lines to identify trend in the stock market and also to identify the direction of the trend. So now let's log into tv.dhan.co and see how we can plot this indicator in a given candlestick chart. So on my screen, I have a chart of BPCL Limited, and let me delete all the existing indicators that are there on this chart, all the drawings and all the indicators, and let me keep it as a pure candlestick chart. Let me change the time frame to say weekly, and let me go to indicators option and search for ADX or the average directional index. So this will plot a line for you which is giving you the phases where the market is trending. So if you notice here, this is where we had a steepness in the ADX line. This is where the markets were also in a strong bear trend. This is where the ADX started picking up. The markets were in a strong bear trend. Now, if I want to add the DMI part, I can just search for this indicator DMI, directional movement, and I will get another plot which has three lines, one being the ADX line and two plots being the DMI positive and the DMI negative line. For the sake of convenience, I would just like to change the colors of these lines. So I'll use the ADX line as a black line because that is a baseline for me. And for DMI positive, I'm using a green color line, and for DMI negative, I'm using a red color line. You can choose any colors that you feel comfortable with. And I'm not changing the settings as well because I'm keeping it as a default setting. Do note friends, we are not getting into the detailed calculations because the charting software is doing all these calculations for you. We are focusing more on the interpretation of these charts and these plots. As you can notice, this black line is your ADX line here. This is where you had a positive crossover in the DMI line and the stock prices went up, and this is where you had a negative crossover in the DMI lines and the stock price corrected. So this is how you can use the ADX indicator with the DMI lines to identify trending and non-trending phases in the market or the stock prices and to identify the direction of the trend. Stay tuned friends. In our next videos, we'll cover a few more such interesting indicators which will help you become a super trader. Thank you and good luck.